Welcome everyone to the third of the What Next Arts and Aging workshops. It's lovely to see familiar names who've attended the previous two and a couple of new names as well. So we're looking forward to a very interesting session this morning entitled What are the Ethics of Engaging with Communities? And this is with Miguel Amado, who's the director of Sirius Arts Centre, and artist Colette Lewis. Just a couple of notes first before we start. So just a little bit about the workshops. So these workshops are part of Strand 3 of the Creative Enquiry Arts and Older People Initiative, which is an artist residency and older people engagement project. So this was a strategic partnership between Cork City and County Council Arts offices, alongside the HSE and Age and Opportunity, and then the three partner organisations of Cork Midsummer Festival, MusicAlive and Sirius Arts Centre. And this was all supported by the Arts Council's invitation to collaboration scheme. So as you may have heard if you were attending either of the previous two sessions, these workshops are designed to be of interest to anyone working in an arts context or a healthcare context and who want to consider arts engagements with older people. So we hope that they're going to be of value to you. Just a couple of housekeeping points. First one is, could you just please all make sure that you're muted when you're not speaking, just for the concentration of those presenting the workshops. And you should also be aware that the workshop is being recorded. Now, the first part, the workshop format, is being recorded, and the Q&A is also recorded, but the Q&A for the kind of privacy and security of participants, and so that people can feel free to add whatever they want to the discussion. The second part is only available on request, so we're not releasing that publicly. We can send you the Q&A if you think it's of particular value to you, but otherwise the workshop is the element that is being recorded and will serve online as a resource for people who want to view them. So we're going to have a workshop format whereby Miguel and Colette take over, and they will run for approximately an hour, and then we will take a 10-minute break. And then, as we did with the other sessions, we'll come back with a Q&A. So you can feel free to formulate any questions that you would like to include. And you can also type questions into the chat if you want, and I can read them out, or you can participate by using the raise hand function to just ask your own question as well. And my name is Ellie O'Byrne. I'm a freelance journalist based in Cork, who I write a lot of arts, and I was delighted to participate in the Creative Enquiry by producing a podcast series. I'll post a link to that as well. So it's fantastic to be back with Miguel and with Colette. And so I'll start off just by introducing them, and then they can take over. So Colette Lewis is a visual artist based in Cork. Her practice is focused on the creative and regenerative capacity of place-based forms of knowledge. Very appropriate considering we'll be talking about Sirius and Cove and her work there. And she has presented her work widely in Ireland and the UK and has received numerous awards from the Arts Council and from other Irish agencies. So a big welcome for Colette. And Miguel Amado is joining Colette. Miguel is a curator and a critic and the director of Sirius Arts Centre in Cove. He's held other posts, including in Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art and Tate St. Ives, both in England, Abron's Arts Centre and Rhizome at the New Museum in New York. And the projects he has worked on and curated include the Portuguese Pavilion at the 2013 Venice Biennale and the Frieze projects at Frieze London. And he studied curating at the Royal College of Art in London. So I'm going to hand you over to Colette and to Miguel now, and looking forward to this.
Great, thanks, Ellie.
Hello, good morning. Welcome again. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to share some thoughts with you and enable Colette also to do the same. As Helga said, this is the third workshop of the What Next program, which is a follow-up from the Creative Enquiry Artist Residency, which was organized in 2019. And to provide a little bit of context, I joined Sirius Arts Centre in February 2020, just 1 month prior to the first lockdown related to COVID-19. And so I arrived to Sirius at the same time as the Creative Enquiry artist residency and the overall project was coming to an end. So I had the chance to attend a public event where learnings and findings about the project were shared by Colette, by Marie Brett, and Helga, Deasy, and Susan McManamon, who were the other artists involved with MusicAlive and with Cork Midsummer Festival. And was basically at that point that I realized the quality, the relevance, and the potential impact and legacy that the project could have in Sirius Arts Center and the other organizations, and more widely within the field. So my position here today is dual. On one hand, Sirius Arts Center has been managing on behalf of the partners and then the stakeholders the What Next program, but today I'm going to speak mostly about my experience of engaging with the Creative Enquiry Artist Residency as someone who inherited it, alongside with the team, including Brian, who is here today, and also how my dialogue with Colette started at that point and enabled us to try to continue some of the strands of the work that she had developed into the post the project, and now then we dealt with the restrictions that COVID-19 brought to all of us, and where we are now in terms of future work. So for the sake of that, we're going to share a PowerPoint presentation in which I will do a more general and theoretical introduction to the question of engagement in the arts, which was at the core of the Creative Enquiry Artist Residency. And then Colette will introduce and describe and examine what happened. So I will be as much as a listener as someone in dialogue with her at that point. And then I'll conclude with the follow-ups that we were able to put together in the last year. Following from that, we will enable the Q&A, as Helly said, and we will also probably ask you to do a small exercise that will help, hopefully will bring back us to questions that are relevant to both of us. Colette, do you want to say any words at this stage?
No, let's just get going.
Okay, so I'm going to share screen now. Can you see my screen? Yes, okay. So we don't need further introductions because they were brilliantly put forward by Helly. And Sirius, when the Creative Enquiry Artist Residency opportunity came up, and this was due to Cork City Council Arts Officers, Community Arts Officer, made in dialogue with the Cork County Arts Office. The question that at the time Sirius asked itself, the former director Miranda Driscoll and a colleague of mine called Claire Ryan, they were directly involved in the project. The question that was asked and that prompted the brief that was then launched to the artist that was selected, in this case Colette, was how to actively engage in and with the direct community, specifically groups of older people in Cove and its surrounds. And I'm quoting from both the brief and the text that was published in the report of the project, which can also be found online, and we can also share today in the chat. So Sirius at the time was interested in initiating and building meaningful relationships with the community. So here you can see the two key ideas: connect, engage with the community, and through that build long-term relationships with that same community. And the focus or the lenses was a cohort of older people, but for Sirius the question was more broad. And the question is why there is a need to engage with the community in an art center like Sirius, and I would say more broadly for all arts organizations. So looking at Sirius, we can almost understand this is a case study to a broader discussion. Sirius is an art center based in Cove and occupies this building that is the former clubhouse headquarters of the Royal Cork Yacht Club. I won't go into the history of the Royal Cork Yacht Club, which is still active today, but it is named as the first yacht club in the world. And it has played a key role in the Irish, British colonial relationships, but most importantly, we as Sirius Art Center inherited the convoluted relationship that that building and that organization represents between sport as an activity, a leisure activity that was only accessible to some members of the society, and by that, how it helped develop strategies of class distinction, say in Ireland or in Cove or in County Cork, and more broadly. So we inherited that, meaning that Sirius, as the former Royal Cork Yacht Club, is a space of privilege. It's a space that creates exclusion, cultural homogeneity, and inequality. Thus, the need to engage with the community in order to tackle that. Today, as an art space, Sirius is also a space of exclusion, because while sports was playing a role in strategies of class distinction, art has played the same role since the 18th century, 19th century, basically with the advent of the bourgeoisie. So we can actually say that Sirius is part of a larger system in which art and art institutions are spaces of privilege and enact cultural homogeneity, inequality, and exclusion. And that can be seen through class. This is an image of the Guggenheim Museum in New York, and you can see projected there the 1%, so 1% against the 99%, the 1% representing the wealthiest of the world. Class division, but it can also be seen as a division around identity. And here it's a rendering of Tate Modern, and I deliberately chose two major art institutions within the visual arts, which is where Sirius operates the most, one in Europe, one in the United States, both in Anglophone countries, which basically are the same cultural ethos that's through which Ireland operates. And here you can see how the architects still today imagine what an art gallery is and the type of people who are in an art space. While it is quite interesting that if we compare this picture with the picture of Sirius just before, it was only full of men, and here we already have women. So there is a conscious of the gender divide that society still has today. You can see that there's the lack of diversity from an ethnic viewpoint and other identity markers how it's still there, very present. So Sirius is a space of privilege, both in its historical context and in its contemporary context. Then, first with the need to engage with the community. How to tackle this idea that the art is a space of privilege, and that the art, contrary to what most of the time we say in public, it's still enacting exclusion, inequality, and cultural homogeneity. So the main question is what to do with this situation, what to do with art and art institutions. Do we still operate for the typical normative demographics? This is a picture from the museum where I used to work before I came to Ireland, in England, in Middlesbrough, which is a post-industrial town. And you can see in 2007 a promotional image of the institution still very much embedded in the idea that this white middle class couple is the typical audiences that the institution wants to serve or target. 10 years later, you can see the difference in terms of the diversity of the population that was at that day in this particular moment in the institution. So do we want to still operate for this kind of demographics, or do we want to engage with other demographics and the other in a broader sense? And engaging with the other is not just about, it's about identity, and identity can be seen from very different perspectives. Of course, I'm here focusing on ethnicity, but if we go back to the Creative Enquiry Artist Residency ethos and original idea, a specific demographic like older people could have been it could have been part of this dialogue, of this reflection, and that's where the focus was at the time. So my question here, and that's where we go into the discussion, and this is how we are putting forward the ideas that were developed by Colette into our contemporary practice at Sirius, is that traditionally arts organizations have an approach to engagement through what we call learning or educational activities or educational departments. Usually these learning and educational departments are separated from the core of the program. They are always an adjunct, they are always at the service of the program. They are not at the core. So they are an auxiliary tool rather than being put at the core, at the mission, at the center of the mission of the organization. And why is that? The reason is because when we're talking about learning and education and more broadly engagement, we are actually not challenged. We are using the language of social justice. So we want to be equal, we want to be inclusive, we want to be diverse. But in fact, we are not challenging the principles that are behind how arts organizations and art is produced today, which is a capitalist principle, which has to do with class distinction originally, and today identity distinction. So in order to be doing real engagement, we actually need to challenge that. And in order to challenge that, we need to challenge the dominant art world ideology, the ideology that permeates policymaking, art practice, and curatorial practice in terms of arts organizations. And the challenge, in a way that is quite simple to outline, is we need to challenge what we have been understood as being great art. Great art is a doctrine that has been inculcated in our minds. Arts Council, say, of Ireland, or Arts Council, say, England, they use great art as their key expression to define a type of art that we want to bring to people, but we don't understand how that exact same great art is what is preventing this real engagement to take place. So this is an example of what great art means. And this is a very famous artist from Germany, which I don't want to discuss now. But this basically goes back in time into 19th century, ideas of the artist as a genius, ideas of the artist and art detached from society. This is really the crucial point. At some point in art history and in the evolution of society in the West and beyond, art became detached from society, art became autonomous. And by doing that, that's when the divide between art and the, say, population started to evolve. So I don't want to spend much time on what is the great art doctrine, but there is a very clear imperialist approach there. And the most important thing is that it usually, great art is performed, enacted by very canonical type of artists, which are very normative and what we call the Western Canon. And then that kind of art can only cater to the typical normative demographics, which I just spoke, leaving outside of that others, and including older people. So what we need to do is challenge what great art is and work with other kind of art. That other kind of art has always existed, but has been, I'm going to use as a term that is not in the slide, it has been subalternized, meaning has been put aside, has been made invisible, has been made in a way that is not mainstream. And this other art is an art that enables a critique of society and potentially social change, an art other that serves the other. And that's where a practice like Colette's practice was really relevant to Sirius and is still relevant today. So the selection of Colette to be the artist in residency in the context of the Creative Enquiry was not just because Colette was a good artist or a bad artist. It's not because, it was because Colette's practice really goes into this idea of social critique and social change. And she had the tools and the capacity to not only engage in the research that would help transform Sirius in terms of engagement with the community, but she was also performing this critique that enables us to try to do real engagement. So I will hand over now to Colette, where she'll describe the project, and mostly less the project itself, or as much as the project as also the questions that were driving her, and not only the tools but also the theoretical questions that what she was interested in and that helped her navigate the research. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Miguel. So there was a number of, I guess, starting points for me in this residency. Obviously, the questions that had been put together by the consortium in terms of, barriers to participations, quality, what constitutes quality arts engagements, and what do the arts offer us as we age. And so I think the whole residency experience itself sort of allowed time to experientially unpack a lot of those questions, because at the beginning it could only be a cerebral exercise without actually engaging in some sort of creative process. The other thing that the Sirius Art Centre were interested in terms of their call out was that they were interested in more sort of process-based inquiry, which really suited this type of, I guess really kind of suited my type of practice as well, which is a type of practice that unfolds slowly over time. And this question I've put up here, this is just one of the sort of the consortium questions that was put to all of the artists in relation to our inquiry. And I think this one is one that I'll focus on for this slide presentation in terms of maybe how I approach it in thinking about artistic practice, and maybe how an arts practice can facilitate meaningful opportunity, because that was the thing, talking about engagement, but specifically meaningful engagement was at the center of this inquiry as well. So this was my starting point. And also, I guess, as a practitioner, I start from sort of a place-based knowledge perspective, and that's where the research sort of comes out of. So finding ways to engage with people within the locality of Cove and Great Island, and to connect with people on the basis of like their lived and embodied experience of place, I knew would be actually the sort of the process by which I was going to engage. Next slide, please, Miguel. So early on in the process, this one here. So early on in the process, this book came up in conversation amongst the other artists, and it was Arnold Fleming was a writer who was working with us as well. He was reading this, and I picked up a copy and I read this, and there was a couple of things in it that really kind of struck me. I suppose in a way, for me, I guess I'm still not in that age bracket of older person. We had lots of discussions and debates around when does a person become an old person. I am just slightly under 50. And so some were saying it's when you're 50, it's when you're it's when you're 55, for some it's when you retire. So I sort of felt that I need to get, again, I guess, sort of deeper understanding in terms of ageism, in particular, in terms of maybe internalized forms of ageism or social constructs of ageism. And actually this book was fantastic. It came out in 2016. Originally it was self-published, and then a year or two later a publishing company picked up on it and read again. But there was a couple of things that Ashton Applewhite proposes, and
I'm really sorry, Colette, to cut across you there, but I think you're having a slight microphone problem. Your audio is very, very disturbed. It seems like something is rubbing against the microphone or something.
Yes, maybe because I've got my sheets.
That's much better. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. Sorry to cut across you.
No, great, Ellie, for pointing that out, because yeah, we need good sound. So this book actually was really informative for me, and there was a number of things that she highlighted, and some of the things that she highlighted was questions around, what are our assumptions about aging and where did these actually come from? And I guess one of the key things that she was saying is that ageism is effectively a social construct, and that our society and culture is predominated or has a kind of youth-centric sort of thinking, and therefore anything that we do to ourselves or together is around maintaining a sense of youthfulness. So she said that ageism is essentially a prejudice against our own future selves. So this sort of prevention or denial of actually aging was really, sort of, inherent within ageism, and is something that needed to be looked at or understood the mechanics of it in order to begin to sort of deconstruct it. And in reading the book, this particular quote really stood out to me in terms of, I suppose, the value of knowledge, and in particular the value of older people's knowledge. So when you retire, what happens to all that sort of knowledge and experience, and how that is sort of understood. So both modernity and ageism have robbed society of an immense accrual of knowledge and experience of older members of our society through valuing economic productivity over humanitarian and communitarian ones. So what was really another force at play essentially is capitalism is a force that's at play here. So when you're no longer economically productive, then you become less valued in terms of sort of the wider society. So this was something that was also sort of really underlying, I guess, my inquiry as well. Next slide, please, Miguel. So that reflected back then, how can an arts practice really engage with this question of value of older people's knowledge, specifically within communities, and how maybe that knowledge has been lost, and how that knowledge essentially maybe could be sort of regained. Yeah, next slide as well, please. So the beginning of my process then, in terms of engaging with Cobh and Great Island, was to connect with communities that already lived in Cobh. So this here is a list of most of the organizations that I would have directly engaged with in terms of sort of beginning this this project. And next slide, please. So what I ended up doing in terms of my approach was to focus on two key approaches, and one would be embedded within a daycare center, and the second then would engage sort of with the wider community. And one of the reasons why I was working within the daycare center as well is that it was addressing one of the questions around kind of barriers and access. So the Sirius Art Center, a lot as regards what Miguel has already kind of outlined in terms of the institutional critique aspect of it. There's also sort of the physical aspect is also an access issue to the Sirius building because it's got steps and its toilets are downstairs, there's no lift access. So it was important that this inquiry also took place sort of in this offsite where I, engaged within a location that was accessible to older people, in particular, more within sort of a healthcare situation. Next slide, please. So a big part of it then was, I guess my sort of driving factor was that it would be, I would be connecting with the lived knowledge and experience of people and place. And I spent quite a bit of time with, say, I approached the residency sort of in two parts. And the two parts would say started in May and went up to the end of the summer. And the second part then started in September. So the first part of the residency for me, a lot of the time was actually spent going out, actually meeting people. And one of the things that I found was actually really important in terms of sort of meeting people was that, I went along to a lot of the groups and organizations that were formal organizations, but also there's a lot of older people who don't attend groups or, aren't affiliated with organizations that are established. So therefore, in terms of access, to arts projects or for, me gaining access, what was really important was to form, I guess, have sort of local ambassadors, I call them, on the ground that became key people that connected me to other people. So these are people who, Moggy Summers actually was a key person, and Moggy appears in one of the podcast series as well. And Mary Kidney, who's here down the bottom right-hand corner, was another person who was really key to connecting me to the wider community in Cobh as well. And I think that's another important factor, especially, I don't live in Cobh on the Great Island. I'm based in Cork City. So for me, in order to sort of build relationships and gain trust, that was sort of a key strategy that I found I needed to use, and it was actually quite successful as well. Next slide, please, Miguel. So within the daycare center, the approach that I used there was going to be quite different, and the approach that I actually used was I invited people to choose an object that would then become sort of the central point within which we would begin a conversation and a discussion. So the workshops, I organized a series of workshops which ran for over 7 weeks, and then it culminated in a book. And there was a couple of things that was sort of really in particular that was significant in relation to this approach, was that we worked in small groups, and the objects that people brought, that they actually had significant value. So it allowed sort of this creative discussion to happen, where people brought sort of, you know, aspects of their life were sort of unpacked or disclosed through these sort of items and objects that they brought. And some of the items were, you know, sort of really old, or some were photographs and some were stories. And in a way, what it really helped to reveal was these sort of very hidden connections that are there within artifact, but also it sort of highlighted kind of the social relations as well, that sort of that are attributed to these objects and items as well. Next slide, please, Miguel. And then the other approach was to engage with the wider community. And I guess the local know-how then in a way has become, has developed as a longer term project, which at the onset, I sort of felt like that I was also, while the Creative Enquiry had a 9-month time frame, I was also interested in the possibility that maybe a project may develop and evolve that would have a sort of a longer legacy. And essentially that is what has happened. And we'll talk about that in a while as well. So in terms of, I guess one of the things I was really interested in terms of like tapping into local knowledge and experience, was to think about, you know, what was the knowledge and sensibility and attitudes of older people within older communities to be resourceful, because a lot of that knowledge and understanding has essentially disappeared, because our society and culture that we live in now values convenience over these other values. So I did a call out to the wider community, and the call out happened through, we created posters, we did sort of local interviews in the radio and the newsletter, and there was flyers, and again, word of mouth, I think actually was a really important approach in this one here, to begin to invite people basically to come and share their knowledge and experience and have a conversation, you know, about these sort of conversations around, you know, what was our understanding of, you know, sustainability, and maybe how this knowledge and experience could be repurposed. And I guess I was really interested in thinking about what can local know-how maybe bring to our present day understanding and recovery of more sustainable ways of living in our communities, so that this conversation engaged expertise and knowledge within the community, but also entered into a kind of a wider discourse around current concerns around sustainability, so that yeah, that it's putting it back center stage, I guess, in our current discourse around that. Next slide, please. So one of the approaches, again, was to organize a series of coffee mornings, and these coffee mornings took place in the Sirius Art Centre itself. We used the, so those of you that know the Art Centre, you'll know also that there is a residency in the lower realm of the actual building. So we use that space to organize, invite people to come in, and you know, there was really interesting conversations that were had, and invited people to bring things, you know, that they might have had items, and one item in particular that one woman brought was a sheet. I don't have an image of it here actually, but she brought a sheet that had been made from flour bags. So up until about the 70s in Ireland and across Europe as well, flour would have been packaged in cotton bags. And these cotton bags were never thrown out. They were always repurposed and used as, used as household items. I even, you know, spoke to my own mother about it, and she actually has, and she's given, I've commandeered it since, but basically it's a bolster pillar that was put together by using 2 of these flour bags. So that started a kind of real interest in terms of, you know, what are the things that are, you know, that we've used before that maybe could be, you know, brought back, and even just thinking about them as cultural artifacts and this material culture that's within our communities, that's again been just kind of discarded or forgotten about. So I was sort of interested in this idea of recovery of skills, but also recovery of materials as well. Next slide, please. So out of those discussions, a number of activities and events actually happened. So this one here, there was this one here is the making of Chester cake, or gur cake, which is a cake that's basically made using stale bread and cake from the day, you know, from the week before, mixed with spices and then topped with loads of icing. Yeah, it's topped with icing and then cut into squares. And it's a local, you know, it's got a long tradition. It's still, you'll still find it in shops in Cork and in Cove as well. So this sort of, so some people in the group were really interested in learning these skills. And, you know, so I myself was a learner in this process, wanting to find out about, you know, how to do these things as well. Next slide, please, Miguel. And then another key one was actually working with Kevin Jones. So I would have met Kevin Jones through the Men's Shed originally. And like that, in the early part of the process, I was visiting lots of different organizations and introducing myself, who I was, and wanting to just kind of find out. So that's part of the research process, is spending time and spending time just being with as well. So I would have visited the Men's Shed, I think maybe on 3 or 4 occasions in that first phase of the inquiry. And through that, I met Kevin, and then, you know, I've been asking them just about their lives really in general. And it came up about, he was a fisherman, and he used to make fishing nets, knitting them. And this was something that was totally new to me, never heard about it before, and agreed to meet with Kevin afterwards, and I ended up going to his workshop and doing a series of sessions with him where he was teaching me this skill, and then proposed to him, would he be interested in a group of people coming together and learning these skills, and maybe thinking about the repurposing maybe of these skills. So what we ended up doing was making shopping bags, and one woman actually made a hammock. But again, so it was more the social context of doing these actions, of what that actually generated, because the working together and there's something about the that sort of tacit knowledge and experience of the doing, and it's through the doing that, you know, there's an embodied knowledge and experience there that gets unleashed, shall we say. So a lot of the sessions were very much about that as well. You know, it wasn't going to learn something and you go away, but it was more about, I guess, stirring something back up again, and rethinking it. And so the idea of rethinking and repurposing was very much an important method, I suppose, in the process as well. Next slide, please. And then also during the process, and so I engaged a lot with Moggy Summers, and Moggy was a member of the Cove Zero Waste organization. So originally, of course, I would have contacted, this is actually how I met Moggy originally, I would have contacted Cove Zero Waste because of their interest in sustainability, and those are themes that were embedded within this project. So I met with Moggy and a couple of other members of Cove Zero Waste, and a conversation around skilling and sharing of skills and knowledge. And it was just, of course, we got to do a repair cafe, and we're going to do a repair cafe in the Sirius Art Centre itself. And so we went about organising this over a couple of months, went through the whole logistics of insurance and how you do it. And one of the barriers to try and do this often is around insurance to do with electrics. And we were lucky to locate an electrician actually in Cove, who himself is interested in, you know, repair, you know, and so was delighted to actually get involved. So it was really important that he was there, because there was a lot of electrics that people turned up with that they wanted to be able to, you know, repair as well. So there was about 11 people who volunteered to repair things and to share that knowledge and skill. The day was absolutely amazing. It was really fantastic, and a whole variety of different, you know, age groups, and there was this the intergenerational aspect of it. I think probably was the thing that was maybe most effective actually on that day. Next slide, please. So this is then becoming the kind of segue of how this engagement then was starting to begin to grow the possibility that this could become a much wider, more inclusive project, and for a community to begin to think about, you know, because Cobh and Great Island being an island, and thinking about coming together creatively, how to imagine and co-create, you know, more equitable and sustainable future on the island. So this was a project then that was, you know, started with an inquiry around, you know, considering the value of older people's knowledge. And then, but through unpacking that, became this much more sort of broader project. And what it highlighted was the fact of just how embedded and essential this knowledge and expertise that's living, you know, currently still active and living in the communities, and how, you know, including that within these conversations is actually really important. I think I just have one more slide maybe to go. Oh yeah, so that's said about doing a serious kind of research. So coming across the research of J.K. Gibson Graham, which we've kind of gone into later on with a book called Take Back the Economy. And the idea of a community economy extends even that as well, because it brings in the aspect of ethics, and to think about how decision-making, so it's a space of decision-making where our interdependence is recognized and negotiated with other humans and other species in our environment. So this then became foundational for what something that's coming later, say in the process, that extends beyond the creative inquiry itself. So in a sense, you could say the whole creative inquiry in and of itself became really generative of wider possibilities and ideas. And in a sense, I guess it sort of illustrates and practices how, you know, meaningful engagement in and of itself can become as a sort of a sustainable model for a sustainable model of practice for creating more kind of inclusive types of arts practices. And I just have one last slide. So at the early on, I guess that was my question, was thinking about, you know, how can an arts practice engage with the question of value of older people's knowledge in our communities? And this is, I suppose, where I kind of arrived to, was that, is that in essence, it opens up a space that will allow the activation of collective imagination and to reimagine and co-create more equitable communities. And what that entails is actually including, you know, all of community. And so that it's not just about engaging, I guess, with older people separate from the wider community, and thinking about it more in terms of an intergenerational sense. So I'll leave it there for now. I'm not sure, we're probably nearly.
That's fantastic. Will we take a break and
No, Ellie, I still need to finalize. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just muted. I'm sorry. Excuse me. It will be another 5 minutes. So as I said early on, I encountered this research and then this set of possibilities in February 2020. And so I started speaking with Colette how to continue at Sirius or through Sirius some of this work. And at the time, we were very interested in what Colette outlined here about the possibilities of, from a research that was focusing on engagement through the lenses of a specific cohort, older people, but are interested in assigning new value or making value of skill and knowledge that older people have in ways that has been made invisible. So assign new value, make it visible. How do we then transfer that into wider society? And we thought that an intergenerational dialogue would be a possibility. And because that was tested within the context of the collaboration with Cope Zero Waste, we also thought that potentially themes of sustainability were the pathway that we could choose to continue our work. And then COVID-19 appeared, and we had to rethink what we were at the time planning to do. And so we went back to this idea that capitalism and modernity has robbed society from knowledge and experience of all their members, through emphasizing economic productivity against other kinds of ideas, more focus on humanitarian and communitarian values. And you may remember that Colette mentioned J.K. Gibson, Catherine Gibson, J.K. Gibson Graham, around the idea that a new way of understanding economy has to do with sustainability, but not just a dialogue or an interdependence among humans, but humans and nature and humans and other species. So all of these somehow took us to conversations with Cove Zero Waste around what could be a potential program that would bring together their interests and their advocacy around ecology and environmental questions, Colette as an artist and Sirius as an art space interested in this kind of civic practice. And we developed an online program that was put together and presented in late 2020 and throughout the first half of 2021. So coinciding with the second lockdown and throughout the 6 months of lockdown in Ireland earlier this year. And we developed a series of online programs, of which called Reframing Community-Based Economies, using the idea of the Great Island as a site, but also a physical site, a territory, but also psychological place. And we had different sessions. I'm just going to briefly mention two. One was reading passages of the book that was quoted by Colette, which basically is a toolkit to reimagine community, to reimagine the economies, take back the economy, reimagine economies and take them back to society rather than have them in the hands of the 1%. And we listened to Catherine Gibson, the author behind one of the authors behind the book, and we were particularly drawn to a tool that she and her collaborators had put together, which was looking at the economy as an iceberg, where you have at the top of the iceberg what can be seen. It is basically a capitalist mode of production, but below the water and in a much broader, larger scale, a whole set of activities that are undervalued or not appreciated. And through that, we could even imagine or come together or encounter other ways of understanding the iceberg connected with local contexts, and also understanding a lot of gender divides and ethnic divides still existing in economies today. So this is another iceberg exercise, in this case, looking at economies in Melanesia. So then we moved on into doing our own iceberg version of the Great Island economy. And so in one of our online workshops, we actually made that. So we used the map of Great Island, we flipped its orientation, and we created our own iceberg, and all online through a tool called Miro. Different people who were participating in that session could map out their understandings of the iceberg economy and the diverse economies that exist in Great Island. And we somehow are in the stage now where we have a more robust group that is more intellectually equipped, but also has shared knowledge and experience among themselves, to then try to revisit some of the things that Colette was developing that could have been further developed, but had to be put on hold due to COVID-19 restrictions. And now, so we have this, we are in this moment where we want to bring together and converge again into a situation where ideas can be continued, and some topics and some ideas can actually be implemented.
Okay, well, I suppose then at this stage we're slightly over time. I just want to extend an enormous thank you to all the participants. It's been fantastic to see the same people, some come back for all 3 sessions, which means that obviously they've been serving of value. And I also want to thank Cork City and Cork County Council Arts Offices, the HSE, Age and Opportunity, the 3 partner organisations of Cork Midsummer Festival, MusicAlive. Kevin from MusicAlive is here with us today, and Sirius Arts Centre, and of course the Arts Council for their invitation to collaboration scheme. This series will be made available as part of the What Next Arts and Ageing resources, which will be available online and hopefully will serve into the future as a way to help people think about some of the issues raised. Thank you all very, very much for your attendance. It's been absolutely fantastic and really valuable experience.
All right, thank you so much. See you soon sometime somewhere, and enjoy the rest of your day, and keep in touch with us if you need anything. And we will make these resources available, and there will be more work. So follow us on social media to know more about what's next within the What Next project. Thank you.